Whether you call them potluck dinners, or covered dish suppers, or dish parties, or bring and share, or pitch-ins, or bring a plate, or dish to pass, or a fuddle, or a fellowship meal, or a faith supper, or a carry-in, potluck dinners are wonderful. Let me tell you, I've shared this with the folks from Fresh Start. When Fresh Start ends, I wonder what I'm going to eat on Sunday night because I only have one dish to choose from. I go most of the year going Sunday night with Fresh Start and having a whole huge buffet, and then I have to go back to just a regular night of eating what I cook. It's kind of boring, isn't it? We here at St. John's Westminster Union Church, as in many Presbyterian and United Church of Christ, enjoy marvelous fellowship, contagious laughter, and the comfort of being in a place where everybody knows your name. And, oh yes, there's the food, isn't there? Tempting aromas fill us with anticipation of the glorious feast to come. Gazing and grazing at the buffet table is one of the true joys of church life. The major challenge at a church potluck, however, is the vast array of tasty choices. It always exceeds our ability to sample each selection. There is always more than enough to pile our plates with culinary delicacies, not just once, not just twice, but even 3 times if we so choose. There are always more than enough leftovers too, so that each one of us can take home still another meal to pop in our microwave the next day. Today's Old Testament lesson addresses the issue of choice in the religious life of God's people. Here, Moses' task has been completed. He had led God's people out of Egyptian bondage through the wilderness. The promised land was in sight. Their instruction and faith was complete, and God's buffet table was visible just across the Jordan River. The people were ready to don their bibs. They were eager to stop gazing and begin grazing. They were ready to change their identity from losers to choosers. However, their choice was not as simple as deciding whether to select meatloaf or fried chicken, or one or all 3 of the selections of macaroni and cheese casseroles. Their choice was truly a matter of life or death. I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live, Moses says. Now that's a powerful choice, an even more powerful promise, isn't it? It should be a pretty easy no-brainer, right? Who among us would choose curses over blessings, not just for ourselves, but for our entire families and for generations to come? Who among us in their right minds would choose death over life? Naturally, we would choose life and blessings every time. After all, we shape our future by the choices we make in the present. Today's Old Testament lesson is taken from Moses' concluding words to the Israelites after they were finally about to enter the long-promised land. The voice of the prophet does not focus on power. Instead, Moses' final words urge the people to do nothing less than to choose life. Deuteronomy is the last book of the Torah, the 5 books of law and covenant in the Hebrew Scriptures. But Deuteronomy is the first book of the Torah to speak of a loving God, and a God who invites our love. You might even call Deuteronomy God's first Valentine. Therefore, Moses makes clear what is required for their choice to be life. They are to love God, walk in God's ways, and observe God's commandments. Scholars have noted in Deuteronomy that love is always a verb, an action, never simply an inner emotion. Moses' command that the Israelites love God is therefore much more than an attitude. It's a call to action. Just as God's love and action delivered the Hebrews from Egypt, Israel's love for God is also to be active, to be demonstrated through the obedience to God's commandments. Choosing life, choosing obedience to God, means choosing love. Love for the Lord your God, love for life, love for each other, and love for all creation stand as witnesses to this new covenant. And the witnesses Moses called to formalize this covenant were heaven and earth, which makes the requirement to love about as widespread as it can get. But choosing life and choosing love and blessing is not as easy as it looks for God's people then or today. Choosing life is to be demonstrated by faithful worship, purity of lifestyle, fair treatment of the weak and vulnerable, faithful leadership, and honoring all of creation. And yet, even with these specific directions, God's people still miss the mark completely, don't we? When the storms and challenges of life are crashing upon us from every direction, it's almost impossible to make any decision at all except to stop the immediate pain and eliminate the overwhelming fear. We choose any port to ride out the storm in safety. And so, left on our own, we cannot follow the clear directions of God's teachings and decrees. Left to our own efforts, we would deserve not life and blessings, but death and curses. Left on our own, life can be just one curse after another. Left on our own, in the middle of life's cursed troubles, we gaze at folks who seem to have it all together. We long to graze at their buffet table of happiness and security. If we could just understand the step-by-step directions to success and joy, we think. A doctoral student who was living in another state forwarded a dissertation proposal to her major professor to critique and enclosed a self-addressed stamped envelope for his convenience. After making suggestions on the proposal, the professor placed it back inside the envelope. Across the flap, he noticed a tape on which the following clear directions were painted with large capital letters. Press it, seal it. So he pressed it, but it would not seal. Again, the professor followed the directions explicitly. He pressed it and he pressed it, but still the envelope would not seal. Then he began to pound and stomp on the flap with the same failed results. Finally, the faculty administrative assistant heard the uproar in the mailroom and rushed to see what was happening. With a twinkle in her eye and a smile that she could not fully disguise, she took the envelope from the helpless and befuddled professor and said, "Watch and learn." She then grasped one corner of the tape and peeled it away from the envelope flap. Then she pressed it, sealed it, and dropped it in the mail slot and returned to her duties. "Oh," said the professor. No matter how clear the directions, God's people, you and me, cannot follow them alone. No matter what seems to be a clear-cut choice, God's people always seem to gaze and graze at the wrong buffet table. However, the good news is that when Moses declared that the Israelites should choose life, he was announcing an already done deal. The covenant had been signed and sealed already on Mount Horeb. The people of Israel did not so much have to choose life as they had to acknowledge with loyalty, obedience, and love the chosenness God had already graced them with. The chosenness of God's covenanted people had nothing to do with their own worthiness and everything to do with God's unmerited love and commitment to the people of God's creation. God chose to enter into a ridiculous relationship with the fractured, fragmented human creatures of his creation. Why? Out of love for us. All we have to do is love him back. That is our choice. And that is how we choose life. The 2011 Academy Award-winning best film, The King's Speech. Anybody see The King's Speech? Good film. It's a story of King George VI and his impromptu succession to the throne of the British Empire in 1936. Royal watchers and romantics alike forever focused on King Edward VIII, who gave up the throne for the woman he loved, never giving much thought to the spare who replaced the heir. With a profound stammer and knock-knees, Prince Albert, also known as Bertie, hardly rated a second glance from anyone until he was suddenly his country's second chance for having a new king. The greatest obstacle preventing Prince Albert from becoming King George VI was his inability to find his own voice. The King's Speech focuses on how the royal monarch's relationship with a gifted speech therapist, Lionel Logue, enabled a stumbling stammerer to become a beloved sovereign. Logue was a self-taught speech therapist without any credentials, but he utilized the most advanced technology he had at hand to help his royal student. He even used phonograph recordings of the king's own voice so that Albert could truly hear himself for the first time. But Logue also used something more important and powerful. He used the age-old power of relationship to tune and tone the king's own voice. It took him years of coaching, learning to trust each other, and building respect for each other before Logue could declare to Albert, "You must have faith in your voice." But when the point came, it was their relationship that enabled the man no one ever thought would be king to finally respond, "I have a voice." It is our relationship with Jesus that has given us new life. And because of Jesus, it is possible for us also to have a voice. Like Prince Albert, as handicapped and weak as we are, we have been given a voice to love. Jesus calls us to stand up and to trust our voice, to stand up and raise our voice, not to tout ourselves or our own abilities, but to announce to the world that it is chosen, and to choose the life that comes with chosenness. We have been offered life and love, and it is this life of love which we are to announce to the world. My friends, do you have faith in your voice? Have you used your voice? Once you have found your voice, and like Prince Albert in the King's Speech, learn to trust your voice and stand up to the world, shouting and exclaiming, "Choose love. Choose life." Thanks be to God. Amen.